Section 13 of Shadowland, September 1919. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Larry Thomas. Shadowland, September 1919, by Various. Department of Photography by the Amateur Photographer. Department of Photography. Prizes to be awarded for the best photographs by amateurs. Shadowland is to have a Department of Photography. Being primarily a picture book, photography will enter largely into its makeup, but we don't intend to let the professional photographers monopolize this magazine. All publications that are devoted to motion pictures and the stage depend for their illustrations on professional photographers. This is so from necessity and not from choice. Yet the truth is that in all contests where prizes are awarded for the best photographs, it is the amateur and not the professional who usually wins. This may not be true of portraiture, but it is doubtless true of all other branches. Roughly speaking, there is a camera in every town in the United States and one in nearly every home in many towns. The camera is a great luxury. When one learns to use it properly, there is no end of pleasure and profit to be derived from it. The first thing a person does when he or she gets a camera is to snap everything in sight. Perhaps all the family are lined up in front of the house, and after they have straightened up and readjusted themselves out of their natural proportions, they are snapped by the proud photographer. Then the house itself is taken, then the dog, the cook, the horse, the barn, etc. But after a time, one tires of this sort of thing, and the camera is laid aside until visitors come or until the vacation arrives or a picnic is planned. But there is another use of the camera, which many have not yet learned, and that is the art of taking artistic pictures. In this department, I shall try to show my readers how to enter this wonderfully interesting new field. In the meantime, we want all those who know what art in photography means to send us contributions for this department. We shall print each month as many of the good ones as we can make room for, and we shall award cash prizes for the most artistic ones. We wish to hear from the amateur photographers only. Write on the back of the photograph your name and address and the title of the picture. It is immaterial whether the print is large or small, but the larger the better, because it is a very simple matter to reduce the size of the picture and very difficult to enlarge it. Yet if the picture is very small, it will probably be useless for our purposes. We can't undertake to return any photographs submitted, but each and every one will be preserved and the better ones placed on exhibition in our editorial rooms. Following are a few photographs taken by the editor of this department some years ago. The last, entitled An Afternoon Ride, is a picturesque subject and is nicely lighted. It would have been better, however, if the little girl had entered into the spirit of the occasion and put a little action in her pose. It is obvious that she is camera conscious. The boy was apparently not old enough to know what a camera was, and therefore the photographer succeeded in getting a good pose out of him. The second picture, entitled Stargazing, is another good bit of lighting and posing, if we do say so ourselves. This picture was, of course, taken in sunlight with a lens well stopped down. The first picture, entitled On the Great South Bay, is picturesque, but it has very few of the elements of a fine photograph. The third example, entitled A Midday Meal, shows a couple of children about to have luncheon on a pail of berries that they have just picked. The principal charm of this picture lies in the naturalness and ease of the posers. Editors are frequently asked the question, what kind of photographs are best for reproduction? Dull finish or glossy ones? Black or sepia? The answer, in our case at least, is that any kind will do, but that black and white prints are preferred. Sepia, blue, brown, green, and other tones do not usually produce as well as black and white. Above all, do not attempt to tint your photographs with various colors if you expect to have them reproduced. One color is bad enough, but two or more colors make a photograph almost impossible for reproduction unless the engraver goes to the expense and trouble of rephotographing it through color screens, which in our case cannot be done. Generally speaking, there are two kinds of photography: the sharp, clear, contrasty prints, and the soft, fuzzy, atmospheric ones. In nearly all prize contests, the latter gets the prizes. It is not so difficult to learn how to snap a scene or an object with just the right lens opening in perfect focus and giving it just the right time, but it is very hard indeed to make such a picture artistic. Study any great picture, such as a Karat landscape or a Malay figure painting, and observe the different values. Notice that the objects in the foreground are strong, and that color gradually disappears or grays as it recedes into the distance. If such a scene were snapped with a small hand camera, universal focus, all objects would appear on the photo with equal distinctness, and the only thing to help the eye determine what was near and what was distant would be the size of the various objects. If there were a fence running into the foreground, into the background, the posts in the foreground would be large and those in the distance very small, thus giving perspective. But very few lenses would give the correct color values of those posts, provided the universal focus were used. The same fence in a painting would contain pure, rich color in the foreground and less color in every post as it approaches the distance, and on the horizon it would be a light, colorless gray, almost the same tone as that of the lower sky. How to get this color perspective in photography is hard to explain. Experimenting is the best teacher. In this connection, it is important to observe that when the eye gazes at a landscape, it gets an impression. That impression is instantaneous, and it cannot be complete and all-inclusive. In other words, the eye cannot possibly take in each blade of grass in the foreground and each post of the fence, and so on. The impression is general. It does not include detail. From this fact arose the great school of artists known as Impressionists. And what is true in painting is also true in photographing. The painter no longer paints every twig and every leaf on the tree, and neither does the artistic photographer try to bring out every little detail of the scene. Nearly all good pictures have some central object or center of interest, and all other objects in the picture are subservient and of secondary importance. When you look at a picture, your eye unconsciously wanders to one particular part of the picture, and that is the center of interest. If a picture has two or more centers of interest, it is not a perfect picture. Very often, a photographer and even a painter finds that he has two pictures in one, and he then cuts up his negative or canvas, making two separate pictures so that each has but one center of interest. For example, suppose you snap a very pretty scene which contains a large tree on one side and a large barn on the other with a road in between. Now, unless you have a quick and sure eye for composition, you are quite likely to get two pictures instead of one, unless you succeed in making the road the center of interest, using the tree and barn as balance. Of course, the road should not be exactly in the center of the picture, and neither should the barn and the tree be equally distant from it, because the center of interest should never be in the center. You may find it advisable before mounting such a picture as I have described to trim the print on one side or the other, eliminating part of the barn or part of the tree. And now, returning to perspective and values. You will find it an excellent plan to focus your lens on the center of interest, which is usually in the fore or middle ground, allowing the objects in the distance to fade into comparative obscurity. In other words, if it be some sheep which are 50 feet from your camera, focus at 50 feet. Then the trees and the hills in the distance will be out of focus, and they will appear properly subdued as to give them the proper perspective. In the next issue of Shadowland, we hope to illustrate this article with photographs by our readers. If you have any pictures laid away that you think are artistic, send them along. If not, please get busy with your camera. The Amateur Photographer. End of section 13.